Park Board, there she is.
Cato, Park Board. So, I'd just like to say thank you again for keeping my passive parks open, not mine, but our passive parks open. We have not had an incident in, how long, Jean?
Week and a half? 2 weeks?
3 weeks. 2 weeks. No incidents in 2 weeks.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Progress.
Our next meeting is going to be August the 5th, and our mayor will be there to discuss our Morgan property, and we will have a final decision on that on Tuesday. So you may have something coming before council that next workshop about purchasing the Morgan property for zero cost or limited cost, which would be nice. And we're looking at some other places around town that we might be able to get. Don't laugh, it's not fun. Are there any questions about our parks? Or any concerns?
For the Park Board?
To the Park Board. Since we're having our meeting next Tuesday, I can take them directly to our group. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I know Sunset Park looks like there's been some maintenance done. A lot of little pocket parks can get some maintenance if, we were hoping they'd give us their temporary input.
So Elsie is feeling better too? Okay, I haven't driven by Elsie lately. I know my little park is loving life. Any other? Yes, sir?
Councilmember Walker.
So I know you, at the last park board, or maybe the one before, you presented a list based on your tour of all the concerns
Yes.
you had. Has there been an official response to the concerns? Have you received one?
An official one, no. But things on my list have been ticked off.
I'd like to see if the mayor can provide an official response to the concerns.
You can. We had the whole list that was presented to Public Works, and they did work through it. And the 2 ponds that we were concerned about, they are getting fencing as well.
Okay. So even if you don't have a, this is done, just we've ordered fencing or just something, don't put a lot of time into it, just
So, but we have the whole list.
No problem.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Planning Commission, anything to report? Nothing, thanks. All right, Druid County Regional Council, we don't have anybody attending that one at this time. Sound Cities Association, I reported it on the last meeting, haven't had another meeting, and they're not having one in August, so we have a break. Skate Board, I went to the last Skate Board and basically was giving updates regarding different transportation budgets. And so everybody is talking about budgets, so nothing real significant to report back to council yet at this time. So, Valley Regional Fire Authority,
We meet 2 weeks from tomorrow.
so we reported on our last meeting, so nothing new to report yet. Okay. So, next on the agenda is old business. Agenda Bill 14-131, a discussion of recreational and medical marijuana ordinances. And my understanding, this is a motion. Is there more discussion on this that needs to be taking place tonight? I'm asking council.
So we at the point where we can, our motion is going to be which one we want to send to the park board, right?
To Planning Commission.
Planning commission, all right. Or the park board, okay, all right.
That's what I'm going to speak on. I honestly, based on the study that we did and the information we gathered in the report, I do believe we should reject any form of medical marijuana and do strict enforcement to abate it from our city, including home grow operations. I would like to support the I-502 recreational marijuana because I believe that there's enough.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not making a motion, I'm just discussing right now.
Can't do that without a motion.
Huh?
Do you have a motion for discussion? For a recommendation for Planning Commission?
I recommend.
You move. Question?
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Waters.
So I would like to kind of take this in a chunk for each kind of piece. So if we can talk about medical first, if we can talk about recreational, retail, and then talk about production and process separately, because I feel differently on each one, and I think if we can discuss one, move it, or not move it to planning commission, and do each one in pieces, I think the conversation will be a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
So let me, this thing's getting really confusing now. We have a public hearing scheduled for August 6th, and that public hearing is scheduled to have all three ordinances to be discussed, correct? So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is the ordinances that were presented to council at the last meeting was an opportunity for a discussion, any changes or any comments that they wanted to take from that, and then make a recommendation to the planning commission if you wanted to send those forward. Maybe Carol, you can help me with this, since we have scheduled the public hearing on all three ordinances. Are we to move all three ordinances to the planning commission before it comes back to council? I'm getting really confused on this process right now.
Okay, well, what I suggest is that we take each one of these ordinances individually and decide whether or not the council wants to send each of these ordinances to the planning commission. And when you're making a motion on each one, you also state whether or not you would like to make any changes to it.
Okay.
Because what I told the council at the last meeting was that we were going to make the selection tonight, but that there could also be a new ordinance that they propose, or they could propose changes. For instance, a change to include individual cultivation. That's not in the draft ordinance banning medical marijuana. So we'd have to make a change for that. And that's something that we could do. So my recommendation is, if you want to do a motion, start with the ban of medical marijuana and, you know, add whatever you want to that and start one ordinance at a time.
That sounds like a great idea.
So with that, then I would like to make the motion to pass the ordinance number 2014-18XZ as it's written here, banning any medical marijuana business, and modify it to include personal grow operations as well.
Clarification, would that be a motion to pass it or a motion to forward it to the planning commission?
Right.
Forward it to the
Recommendation.
planning commission.
Okay. Just making sure we don't pass the ordinance before the planning commission.
Right.
Yeah.
Well said.
XZ?
So could you restate your motion, please, so that we make sure that...
Okay, I would like to make a motion to send forward to the planning commission the ordinance regarding banning any medical marijuana businesses with language that includes banning home grow operations, individual cultivation.
No, because we're not passing anything, we're making a recommendation. Okay. Is there a second? Okay. Councilmember Hayes, would you like to speak?
Yeah, based on the information that I received from this study that we did and researching it a little further, and then reading the decision from the appellate court regarding the Kent case, it's clear that the original medical marijuana as passed has been virtually gutted. It's technically not legal based on what the appellate judges have said, and based on what we're seeing DEA starting to do in our state with enforcing and cracking down on these dispensaries that are operating outside of the boundaries that were even defined for them. I believe the dispensaries in our city are acting outside of the intent of the medical marijuana that was passed, bill that was passed by the state initiative, because when I read it, you weren't supposed to be advertising or have signs, and they look like they're storefronts, and they're open for business. So I don't think there's a legitimate way to enforce it. I don't think we have the resources to enforce it as a city, and I don't think the state's doing anything to enforce it. I think they're trying to come up with some legislation to do so, but I think it's in our city's best interest if we shut those operations down.
Okay, Councilmember Walker.
I agree, and based on advice from the attorney.
Okay, further discussion from council? Comments? And then comments from the audience? On banning medical marijuana, any comments that you would like to include in this?
I have a question.
Please come up to the mic, your name and address.
This is a question about the possibility of commenting. My comments were based on the agenda that I received that encapsulated all of those three things. Can I go ahead and make those comments, even though they're not specifically about medical, but they're about everything as it was on the agenda?
Yes, I will allow it because of the way it was on the
Okay.
agenda, yes.
Thank you.
Mark Goss, 603 3rd Avenue Southeast. I ask that you do not approve the resolutions permitting growing, processing, or retail sale of recreational pot in Pacific. We're not ready to be on the leading edge of this experimental business in this community. For those of us who will deal with the impacts after sale, the description given at the July public hearing of this business as, quote, well-regulated from seed to sale is not enough. In addition, when I was at the June 9th Planning Commission public hearing, the businesses behind us were very clear that they believe the responsibility ends, quote, at the door. However, that is exactly where our community begins. We know the significant negative developmental and health impacts of early and regular use by kids. They and we live on this side of the sale. In speaking for the great number of responsible parents and guardians for the kids and youth in our community, we are not ready for this. The state's well-regulated system, quote, ends at the door. The growers, producers, sellers say their interests end at the door. This means it is youth, parents, teachers, health workers, friends, scout leaders, pastors, parish workers, and many others on this side of the door who will be dealing with the impacts. The resources, education resources, alternatives, treatment, health, are not in place. We're not ready. Do not permit recreational marijuana businesses in town. 3 specific requests. Address the medical and recreational as 2 unique topics. You guys are talking about that. Delay the discussion and action on medical for a month or so and fully address recreational on its own merits. These are 2 separate issues, each with its own questions, challenges, opportunities, and matters of concern. 2, return the draft resolutions with the instruction that your staff report resolutions banning the grow, process, and retail businesses for recreational marijuana. Return that report to the marijuana study group with instructions that they need preparations by an unbiased review of the costs and impacts of the introduction of this business to our community, including health, public safety, traffic, utility impacts, water use, wastewater treatments, prepared by a balanced and informed selection of persons. 3, I'd ask that you set a time for the council to call witnesses who can bring direct and informed voices to your deliberations, including the possibility of dialogue, conversation, and opportunities for clarification. You do this on other topics. When the staff brings something, they bring in engineers and others, and you engage in a discussion. 3-minute statements are not sufficient to cover the wide range of impacts made by the business of recreational marijuana in our community. I'm going to keep going until you stop me because I got more. As noted in the council public hearing in July, there's a whole long string of we don't knows connected with this business. Traffic impacts, water, wastewater system demands, myriad of environmental impacts normally revealed in the SEPA process. Our neighboring communities are saying no, making Pacific a potential hub for this business, for this area. Once one is permitted, we cannot live at the next, or the next, or the next. I've not seen a responsible analysis of public safety, public health, and the related impacts of where we will go if we begin to walk down this road. A yes now to the current pressure will mean that even if we should change our minds down the road, the marijuana businesses will be with us for a long time. You can make the choice to not let them begin now, which can be changed when you have more information from the experience of other cities when that comes together. On the other hand, if they're permitted now, the process for getting them out is a long and costly one, as outlined by the city attorney at the council public hearing. I've repeatedly heard that these new businesses have threatened lawsuits if they are not permitted. In fact, the news stories has this, just this last week, when Bonnie Lake banned, they had a lawsuit on their door the next day. Is this an indication of the style of business neighbors this industry will be in our community? I don't believe this is the kind of business practices that lead to healthy growth and development in our community. Tell them no lawsuits. What does that gain us? I ask you not to approve the permitting of recreational marijuana businesses grow or process or retail in the city of Pacific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mark, if I may, just for a clarification, 3-minute rule only applies to items not on the agenda. You don't have to rush when you're addressing something on the agenda.
Well, I've been shut off so many times. I appreciate you saying that, but I've been shut off at the public hearing. I got my 3 minutes. Others got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Is dialogue also included in that, or is it still just a statement? But let the dialogue with that.
Sorry, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you can do that. You can choose to do that.
Okay. So are there any other comments related to the motion on the floor regarding banning medical marijuana ordinance that will be referred to council, or to the planning commission?
Just one, I'm curious, do we have enforcement practices and policies and all that in place if we ban home grow operations? We don't currently inspect homes for what people might be doing in their bedrooms. Is this something where we would be actively looking for enforcement, or as in the usual case, if someone manages to set their home on fire by bad grow lights, that they also get cited for a grow operation?
Go ahead, yes.
You're soon going to be seeing a new code enforcement ordinance. With regard to how it's enforced, most cities only enforce their codes on a complaint-made basis. There are very few cities that actually hire code enforcement officers and then have a system of going out and actually looking for violations. Most cities don't have that luxury. So it would just be as things turn up.
The benefit of at least having the ordinance in place, if they do set their house on fire, then they have to contend with their insurance company, and they become uninsurable. So there is a little bit of incentive. And then if we can put a fine structure together that if they get caught without necessarily burning their house down, but, you know, you start seeing illegal activity out of the house or lots of traffic and a complaint comes in and we catch them, then we can put a substantial fine in place that will deter that type of activity, or at least force them to take it out of our city.
I have one other comment on that. With regard to the issue of whether or not you should adopt a prohibition on medical marijuana, it also is important because you don't want anyone to come up with the argument that they're a legal non-conforming use. That at one point in time you didn't have an ordinance that allowed it, or that you didn't have an ordinance that didn't prohibit it, and so therefore once you prohibit it, now they're a legal non-conforming use. It's not an argument that's going to be successful, but we can cut that off at the...
Great. Excellent. Thank you. I wasn't sure if we were finished getting comments from the audience. So.
Well, simply stated, let's get rid of the marijuana. I think that's probably the opinion of most of the people in the city.
Pastor Tyree, can I get you to state your name and address for the record?
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Pastor Russell Kyrie, a pastor of the Valley Baptist Church over on the corner by the ARCO station. We've been in town for 44 years, I guess. And anyway, we would not want to see any marijuana grown, sold, or anything here. Control it, keep it from getting out there and doing its damage. They will. And that's what I would say about it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any further comments from the audience? Okay, additional comments from council. Councilmember Garber-Dean.
Would that be something that you should exactly as people that come into the public meeting and voicing their opinion?
So I would highly recommend that people attend the planning commission public hearing on August 6th.
Maybe you can get your people that have an opinion to come and voice their opinion to the public meeting on August 5th at the planning meeting, or planning commission meeting?
Okay, for the 6th, that is Wednesday, or what is?
Yes, this is a Wednesday.
That's a Wednesday.
They could also submit written comments.
Yes, thank you for including that. And written comments can be submitted as well. Okay. Councilmember
I just wanted to
Olivera.
clarify on the medical, on your motion for banning medical marijuana businesses, did you also include homegrown into?
Yes, you did.
I have a question about why it would be bad for people to grow their own plants. What is your reason for that?
Several. There's health concerns because there's no inspection process to ensure that the product itself is safe to use. People can grow it at home for people other than themselves, so there's no way to regulate and control who they're distributing it to, just like there isn't in these dispensaries. They're supposed to have 10 people per 45 plants, but we know that it's a revolving door, and there's more than 10 people per 45 plants.
Right.
So I have health concerns about that, especially the repackaging of buying candy at the dollar store and then pouring their oils on it, and repackaging it, and not knowing if the oil itself is safe.
Homegrown.
But it's all of it. They're doing it at home too. Okay, there's people setting up dispensaries within their home, not for personal use, but growing for other people and in their home because there's a gray area in medical marijuana still. And so I have issues with that. There's no regulatory controls in place to ensure that the product is safe, that it's, whether it's toxic or not. There's a myriad of issues with something that has no regulation. I mean, it has FDA controls for crying out loud. I mean,
Okay. I questioned it because there's no regulations or movement, making their own wine, making their own beer, any of that
but
stuff.
you're
And
making
if
it for personal consumption.
Or
There's
you
no-
give it
We need to stick to the
Yeah.
motion on the floor.
I'm-
This should have been discussed at the last meeting.
Well, no, I'm just saying, one person can talk at a time.
I just questioned it.
Councilmember Jones.
Well, the issue is, we're making a motion to move this
To the planning
to
commission.
planning
We're
commission
not
to have a
voting.
public hearing. So all he's doing is including the inferences in relationship to private grow facilities that are in a home. So we can make that addition to the motion, move to the public planning commission. They can review it, have their public hearing, return the ordinance as issued. We can then have a needed discussion before we vote
On whether or not to allow home growth?
on anything on that.
Okay.
Councilmember Kay.
My other concerns are the fact that there's people extracting oils without using proper systems that are safe to use. There's issues with the type of equipment that's being used in homes, that the home electrical systems aren't designed to hold that type of capacity, which is what's causing fires, explosions, things like that. When an event like that occurs, it doesn't just displace the family that caused it. There's oftentimes, because they can be fueled by flammable gases and liquids that can cause them to get so intense and hot that the fire spreads to a neighbor's house, and now a neighbor has been adversely impacted by it. And all because there's no direct controls in place to ensure that it's being done safely or properly. And there's just
Carol, you had a comment.
researching the information, I just don't see how it's legitimate.
We should have a microphone over there for you.
That's fine. I just wanted to caution everybody that all we're doing right now is forwarding the ordinance to the planning commission. And the reason you're forwarding it to the planning commission is because you want them to have a public hearing so that information can be gathered from the public, evidence, and you don't want to appear as if you've made your decision before you actually receive the information from the planning commission. Once the planning commission makes a recommendation to you and forwards you their ordinance, you can change it any way you want. You can have another public hearing, you can throw out the recommendation altogether and start all over. You're not limited in any way. All you're doing right now is just forwarding it to them for them to hold a public hearing.
Thank you. trying to get to that. Councilmember Steiger.
What I'm understanding is here, now, even if we go ahead and forward this ordinance and come back from the planning commission with their recommendations or whatever, we can still adopt an ordinance banning marijuana totally in the city.
Yes.
My understanding is right.
Yes, we can. Right now, we're just trying to make a recommendation to the
Okay,
planning
I
commission.
just want to make sure I didn't leave any loopholes. All right.
Any further comments from council?
Just one.
Councilmember
I would certainly be open to if the planning commission comes up with some alternative to banning home growth where they think we could effectively and economically regulate it to a point that it's safe. Certainly would be willing to entertain alternatives, but as far as cause for concern, the former mayor of Bellevue was killed in a home hash oil explosion not too long ago that's now the subject of an FBI prosecution. So whether banning it is the right answer, I'm not sure. Well, that's to the planning commission. But as far as cause for concern, yes, there's absolutely cause for concern. There's 6 or 8 people currently being prosecuted on federal charges just in Western Washington for hash oil explosions in homes.
Further comments from council? Okay, so all those in favor of moving this recommendation to the planning commission that banning medical marijuana and including the homegrown, okay, for the planning commission to consider, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, one. The second ordinance.
So I'd like to make a motion to adopt the ordinance allowing recreational marijuana producers, processors, and retailers as a conditionally permitted use in the light industrial zone, and forward that to the planning commission.
Are you combining those two together, the processing or retail that I hear you say?
That's all, that's the current. I would also like to have a modification to that ordinance to consider restricting retailers to commercial.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Commercial zoning for like storefront out of stores versus in an industrial park.
For the retail?
What, you want them like next to Guy's Market? Or do you want them?
So first, let's get the motion out and get a second before we start opening up to discussion. So what is your motion?
To adopt the ordinance as presented, not adopt, to forward to the planning commission as written, but have them consider allowing retailers in commercial areas only, and maybe even with possible restrictions and ideas on where to locate them.
I'll second that for discussion.
Okay. Councilmember Page, take your motion.
Yeah. I know there's concern with this, but to me, after doing the research and being part of the committee that researched this, I don't see how marijuana is any worse than alcohol. I believe that every person has the right to enjoy the vice of their choosing, and I don't have the right to impose upon them, to restrict them from doing so. Washington state voters have decided they want to invoke their state's right above and beyond federal jurisdiction to allow this process. Our own voters in the city of Pacific overwhelmingly passed this initiative, and I think it would be irresponsible of us to go against their wishes.
We need to be cautious on how we make this recommendation to the planning commission. Not assuming that we're going to make a decision. Continue. The other commercial.
Well, and then the commercial zoning, because that's where storefronts belong. I mean, if they're gonna have a store and they're gonna sell product, it needs to be out of a commercial business. Keep the industrial zone to industrial. We don't want to attract people to an industrial area to buy stuff. I mean, that's where processing and manufacturing belongs, not where purchasing belongs. And one of the things you can do, we can identify commercial areas that are close to high traffic areas like Highway 167, so people can stop in, get what they want and take it home with them and not have to come through our town and possibly start using it while they're in town on their way out of town. I just think it's a good thing to consider.
Councilmember Putnam.
No, you're not proposing you're changing the zone, but not proposing any change, that they consider any change to the 1,000-foot limit around elementary, playground, recreation, childcare, public parks, transit, library.
Nope, I wouldn't be able to, because that's a state law.
Right, so I'm just getting to that, but just saying it's gonna be in retail doesn't mean it's gonna be a dive, because that's not
Exactly.
it.
Councilmember Walker.
Ken, are you aware of any commercial zoning that fits the state's requirements of 1,000 feet?
Yep, pretty much all of Stewart Road.
Where they are now.
And the trail would,
Trail is
The
not a
linear
park.
trail doesn't count,
Not
right?
park.
I tried asking that question. Further comments from council?
so in hearing, what you calling it?
Oh,
Go ahead, finish, council.
Oh, okay. So in hearing some of the comments and reading some of the comments we received written, and the state continues to say, and they've set the guidelines, but my concern lies where they have to reinforce it, so they have to enforce it. And the federal government said, if we don't enforce it, they can come in and enforce federal law. So I have a hard time passing it with the limited resources we have now, allowing it in any way, shape, or form. In a year, maybe, let's see what it looks like in a year, but I have concerns about passing it now. So I'll vote no on this as it stands.
Are we making a recommendation for us to sign it?
I would make a recommendation to move a ban, but maybe it can go either way.
Councilmember Jones.
For clarity purposes for me, Councilmember Walker would identify, is he not going to move the motion or agree to the motion to send this to the planning commission for review and consideration? Because that's what everybody, we're talking around us.
I know.
And the issue that we're talking about is, are we going to make a motion and agree to it to send this to the planning commission for their review and recommendation back to us? That's all we're asking at this point. He's asked for consideration for the planning commission to review to determine whether to put it in a commercial zone. But that's it. It's still up to them, do their review, do their planning, the public hearing, and then make a recommendation back to us. And then we can make modifications and decide whether we're going to pass it or not at that point. But right now, the only thing on the table is, are we going to make a motion to move it to planning?
I just wanted to say that it would be to your benefit to pass along an ordinance that was the broadest possible ordinance so that you would get the most information from the public. So one suggestion that has been made would get you more information. If you if you have a motion to say that producers and processors be located in the light industrial zone and retailers be located in the commercial zone, you're going to get more information than if you pass along an ordinance that says processors, producers, and retailers will all be located in the industrial zone. If you pass an ordinance now that says, or if you direct that they consider an ordinance that bans it, you're not going to get much information in the way of alternatives.
So if we move something forward, and Councilmember Cade said the city overwhelmingly passed it, but if I remember correctly, it was like 16% of voters in the city turned out for the election. So I can't say that it was overwhelmingly approved. The people that voted overwhelmingly approved it, but the other 79 or 85% or whatever didn't. So if we send forward this ordinance that says we're banning it completely in the city, and citizens come out and say, I want you to allow it, I mean, maybe that's, I'm taking it the wrong way, but you think people would come out and support it rather than not, but maybe it's just not the way we do it.
Councilmember Putnam.
If our goal is to maximize public input, could we ask planning commission to review this one and the ban, and we'll get input from both sides?
You're going to get input on a ban.
I'm sure we will, yeah. But proposing a ban and floating it down there would get more input, I suspect, from the people who oppose the ban, and not proposing it'll get, if you antagonize both sides, they'll both come out.
So is that a motion then?
Is that a motion?
No, we already have a motion on the floor.
Right, I'm like, are we amending this motion or what? So any further comments from council? Okay. I'm asking council before I go to the... Councilmember Jones.
So, without the ban reference, because the original motion, unless he's asking for an amendment to the motion. Right now, the motion is allow recreational marijuana producers, processors, and retailers as a conditional permit in the light industrial area zone, and also for consideration of retailers in the commercial zone. And that going,
As a conditional use.
as condition, but that going to planning for review. That's what I hear.
That's what I understand is the recommendation. Further comments from council. Councilmember Steiger.
Well, you said allow in your statement, we're not allowing.
This is for the
We're not
planning
voting on
commission
it.
to review the allowance, the
Really
consideration
allowing, okay.
all right, retail and commercial, right, not just light industrial.
Further comments from council? Okay, comments from the audience. Please come up and state your name and address for the record.
Excuse me though, could we clarify for the public that this is not the hearing on the ordinance, and so this is not the time to take testimony on whether or not they...
Right, that's true. Generally, our council rules, anything that's on the agenda, we allow the citizens to have an opportunity to speak on items that are on the agenda. But we just want to make it very, very clear, all we're doing is making a recommendation to go to planning commission. We're not voting on anything other than moving it forward.
My name is Howard Gustafson, and I'm on County Line Road. I'm on the planning commission, and I'm rather confused now in the second request. I would like to have it situated that we can vote, one, on raising it, and two, on selling it. And I would like to have us be able, as planning commission members, to look at that in two different ways and not just all in one way.
And I believe that's how it's being presented to be moved forward to planning commission to look at both those ways.
We can?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, they're just looking at the ordinance, collecting information, and then they can decide.
Correct, that's what we're doing.
And make a
It's not-
recommendation.
This is really not the time to be taking a bunch of public testimony on it.
The form of the ordinance as sent to them is just a draft, and if they want to break it into 3 separate ordinances on growing, producing, and retailing, then we'll get back 3 separate ordinances on growing, producing, and retailing. None of, the current form is not binding on them as to how they present it back to us.
Trying to give planning commission direction
Yes,
to move
as
forward.
a former planning commissioner, we're free to disregard council and things like that.
You and everyone else.
So was there further comment?
Because of the
I thought you had spoke to all
I will
3 at
speak.
one time.
But because you broke it up,
Okay.
and because of the direction this is going, I will make this direct to what you're speaking of now. Trent, you're spot on. You can, I believe you should, say no, direct your staff to draft a resolution that bans. Madam Attorney, I won't speak to you, but I will speak to the council. If you want lots of turnout, put a recommendation to ban, and you'll get lots of information from that lobby who's pro. You're still going to get those of us who are saying, we're not ready. You can do that tonight. And the way you move things forward, you guys are all politicians, you know this, the way you begin shapes the way you end. If you begin, we're going to do this, it takes a lot to say, we're not going to do this. If you begin, no, this is not what we desired. We're hearing the voices of this community. This is not what we want to do. And you're going to have to prove that this is a good idea for our community now.
Point of order,
So you can say no.
not related to the motion.
Kate Howell, 102, Alderman South, Pacific. So, I would just like to ask if you are going to suggest this to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission is going to have another public hearing about it, that we do a little better publicity this time, so that this, I would suggest maybe, delaying it and putting it on the utility bill that we're going to have this, because I know the people that live around me did not know about the first one, and the only reason I know is because of her and the fact that she makes me read her blog. So, and she only has like 70 people.
80 now.
Oh, sorry, 80. So I'm just saying, could we have some better communication out to our community, that this is going to be, and that this is the final hearing, come now or forever hold your peace. Thank you.
Thanks. Further comments from the audience? Further comments from council? Councilmember Walker.
Will the attorney be present to give the direction to the planning commission about kind of what Josh spoke to, is they have the ability to break it up or do whatever they feel is necessary based on public comment?
If you want me to, I'll be there.
I think it would be very helpful, and money well spent.
Sounds good. Further comments from council? So, Amy, can I get you to read what the motion is? I did, that's what I wanted to make sure, it was clear on the record.
As I understand it, Councilmember Cade moved to forward the ordinance to Planning Commission as written, but have them consider restricting retailers to commercial zoning.
With it, as a conditionally permitted operation.
Could I just rephrase this for the record? To forward the ordinance allowing recreational marijuana producers and processors as a conditionally permitted use in the light industrial zone, and to modify that ordinance so that it also allows retailers as a conditionally permitted use in the commercial zone. Is that your motion? Yes.
Would the attorney advise against a motion to add an ordinance to recommend the planning commission banning these for a term of, I don't know, a year, 18 months, are we looking at it?
It is up to you. You make policy, and if you want them to review another ordinance, I'd be happy to draft. I actually have an ordinance drafted. It's a complete ban, and if you want them to look at that, we can have them look at that too. It's up to you.
I would like to make that motion, but I'd like to...
We have a motion on the floor.
Do I have to, can I modify this one, make an amendment, or just, do you want to separate?
I would do it separately.
Okay.
I would think, right? Yes. All those in favor of the motion that was just read by Carol, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
So do a roll call vote.
Okay, Councilmember Garberding? Aye. Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Councilmember Cade?
Aye.
Councilmember Olivera?
Aye.
Councilmember Putnam?
Aye.
Councilmember Steiger?
No.
Councilmember Walker?
No.
Thank you. Okay, next, we have a third one, right? Do you want to continue on, Vic?
Sure. I would like to make a motion to adopt the ordinance, or to forward to the planning commission the ordinance adopting business license requirements for recreational marijuana uses in the city. And also add to this, review our current business licensing practices to come up with language, review potential language changes regarding how business licenses are issued. And the reason for that is
You
now...
have a second.
Second.
Let's speak to that.
The reason for the additional review is because currently we have in our business licensing statute that we will only issue business licenses for businesses that operate under local, state, and federal laws. And since this is against federal law and we're imposing state rights, we need to come up with some sort of language modification that allows this operation outside of federal law.
Councilmember Walker. Carol, did you want to speak on that?
She was just about jumping out of her seat.
No, not at all. I was just writing down that that's certainly appropriate. I just want to make sure that you all understand that I'm going to be drafting these ordinances, to present, and I can make that change, no problem.
Okay. Further comments from council? Comments from the audience? Comments from council?
Just one.
Councilmember Putnam?
And I guess it's more of a question for the attorney and possibly for the planning commission to consider. Do we want to look at removing the compliance with law provision in general, or making an exception to it for cases where the voters of the state have approved operations contrary to federal law? Do we want to, for example, we don't have a local statute against child pornography. Do we want to have to issue licenses to child pornographers if we remove that provision?
Well, I can tell you that under state law, you have the authority delegated by the legislature, and it says that you can issue business licenses to uses and activities that are legal under state law. It doesn't mention federal law. So the fact that you mention federal law in your ordinance is something that is over and above actually the authority that you've been granted. But that's because, people just think, federal law, you don't really normally have to deal with it. Marijuana is just a very, very unusual use. We've never seen anything like this. So by taking federal law out of there, it's not going to diminish your ordinance in any way.
Thank you.
Further comments from council? Amy, could you read the motion?
Councilmember Cade moves to forward to planning commission the ordinance adopting business license requirements for recreational marijuana uses, and requested to add a review of potential language changes about how business licenses are issued. That we affect Councilmember Walker.
All right. All those in favor of the motion as read, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The aye.
No.
Okay. So, and then since we're on this topic, I think we can entertain the question.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules to add the ordinance yet to be named, sending a recommendation to the planning commission banning all retail processing and production of marijuana for a term untold time. There we go. Go with that.
Would you like to speak to your motion, Councilmember Walker?
That was just a motion to suspend the rules.
Suspend the
and add
rules.
it to the agenda.
So all those in favor of suspending the rules to add that to the agenda, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
So, you want to go ahead and...
I would like to make a motion to approve the ordinance that just be named, or numbered, recommending the ordinance to the planning commission to review and hold public hearing on banning all retail, processing, and production, I'll give it this one week stage, of marijuana for an unnamed period of time.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Councilmember Walker.
I think I've already said.
Councilmember Steiger, would you like to speak that way?
No, so I mean,
Any other comments from council? Councilmember Kay.
Yeah, again, I don't see the point in it. If you want to ban it, we can ban it if recommendations come from the planning commission. I think we've had moratoriums and bans, and the council previous to this council have had several opportunities to make decisions on this, and have chosen not to. And now that we're at the forefront of, things have already been passed, I mean, we could make decisions in medical marijuana passed before 502 got passed. And it just seems like it's been drug on long enough, and, we just need to, get off the pot and make something happen one way or the other. And I think by sending a proposal for them to review banning it makes it easy for them. They say, oh yeah, let's just ban it because it's easy. And they won't look at the reasons to allow it.
Other comments from council? Councilmember Walker?
In the past, it hasn't been council dragging our feet. We've been waiting for other jurisdictions to resolve lawsuits. We've been waiting on planning commissions. We've been waiting on state law and the guidelines to be set by the state. So council hasn't been dragging its feet for years on this issue. I'll clarify that. So I think it presents two options. People can come out and speak to which one they like the best, and I think we see what happens. Which just about runs the microphone to Ryan.
I just wanted to let you know that if we have an ordinance that bans marijuana, and it would just, sounds like it should be bans all marijuana, it's not just going to be a slam dunk, like one page, it's banned. It's going to have to be very lengthy. It's going to have a lot of evidence from the public to support the ban. So we are going to have to get evidence to support that. If people come and they just say, I just want to ban it, that's not going to be sufficient. We're going to have the reasons in there.
And that's what I'm hoping for.
And that's why you're asking me to be there, so I can drag it out of everybody.
Exactly, yep. And write all that legal term stuff in there too.
Right.
Further comments from council? Comments from the audience? This is a recommendation going to...
Right.
One more time.
Jean Fancher, 37248 55th Avenue South. A reference was made to the Pacific City Signal blog, which I write and post these things. I'm in favor of moving this ban option to the council because, as we have seen in past years, Pacific feeds on controversy. What brings people out is controversy. Whether it is putting up fences between your house and a nature park that you think should be only 4-5 feet tall, and the code says 4 feet, that brings people out. RVs, something folks don't like, that it impacts them immediately. So the more options there are to be considered by the Planning Commission, the more publicity that can be generated. Pull out the Auburn Reporter, and God knows Como News 4 owes Pacific some publicity for all the ratings increases they got a couple of years ago. So I'm saying, move forward, make it a big stink. Thank you.
Gary Nitschke, 102 Blue Avenue. I support Trent's motion. I think that the more information that you can give the Planning Commission at this time would be very beneficial, and I'm sure that they would appreciate this.
Thank you. Any further comments? And then further comments from council? Any further reasons?
Before I do, what would your latest time?
I think Planning Commission can make a recommendation.
Councilmember Walker moved to forward an ordinance to the Planning Commission to ban all retail processing and production for a period of time recommended by the Planning Commission.
And did you get all three? Production.
Production, okay. All those in favor of the motion just read signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Nay.
Roll call of council, please.
Councilmember Kay?
No.
Councilmember Olivera?
No.
Councilmember Putnam?
Aye.
Councilmember Walker?
Aye.
Councilmember Steiger?
Aye.
Councilmember Garberding? Aye. Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So believe we've covered all
I'd
of
like to make a
that.
motion to suspend the rules.
Okay,
We are going to be pressing against our interim zoning ordinance, 6-month moratorium. I believe it expires August 3rd. And I would like,
to the next item on the
is
agenda.
that the next item?
Yeah.
Okay.
Never mind.
I thought they were together.
There's another item on the agenda. Item B.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Are you good? You
Yes,
withdrawn that?
I'm good.
All right.